So these are our notes on section 2.2. We're going to be working with conditional statements. Again, some vocabulary happenings, so try to get in the habit of having a highlighter out perhaps and then highlighting as you go so you know when you start making your note card what you really need to put on there in terms of the vocabulary. So a conditional statement is also called an if-then statement. Like if this, then that. Sometimes we call the this, what follows the if, a hypothesis, and it has the letter P. So sometimes we'll say if P, then, and we call whatever our conclusion is Q. So P and Q become actual statements. The notation for that is we write P, arrow, Q. You're going to see that the symbols, you're actually going to like when you're allowed to use them because you don't have to write whole sentences. But you'll get used to that as we go. So up here I have a statement, a conditional statement. It has a if, this, then, that. So this part of it would be called the P. This over here would be called the Q. And we also say that that P is the hypothesis. It follows the if. So I'm going to erase that. The sentence will go if, and then your hypothesis. So on this sentence, my hypothesis is I am hungry. That's what happens first. That is the if part of my statement. With notation, we call that the P. And then we have our conclusion. My conclusion is that after I'm hungry, I eat. So conditional statement, I'm going to repeat, is an if-then statement. What follows the if is called the hypothesis. Its notation is the letter P. What follows the then is the conclusion. Its notation is the letter Q. You're going to be responsible for both the words and the symbols. So on this next statement right here, it says, I eat when I am hungry. And I don't see the if and the then. You often won't, so you're going to have to know how to get it into if-then form before you can identify. Sorry about that. So I like to tell kids to replace the when with the if and then rewrite it. So I'm going to put a little if above here and draw an arrow. You follow your if. Just like up here, it said, if I am hungry, I read that I am hungry. So when I follow the if on this statement, I will get if I am hungry. Again, you can pause it and be more time for it than else. Then I eat. You don't have to make it hungry. So much. Alright. So replace the when with the if. So you might want to write on the side that the word when in these statements, in your head, you can replace it with if and then follow the if. I'm going to practice that one more time just to make sure you have it. So if I were to say, you don't need to write this down, just watch, or you could if you want to. I cry when I am sad. I don't see the word if on here. I cross off the when, I replace it with an if, and then I follow the if. So the conditional statement in if-then form would be if I am sad, then I cry. The sadness comes first, the crying comes second. All right, so back to this one. The hypothesis is what follows the if. So here's my hypothesis. It would be that I'm hungry. After the hunger, or the conclusion, or after the then, is that I eat. So that's our first task, that you can identify a hypothesis and a conclusion, even if you don't see the words if and then. Okay, let's move on to the next page. So our next one right here is going to be to determine the truth value of the statement. Basically, that just means, is what I'm writing or saying true, or is it false? It's basically a game of true or false. So when you say what's the truth value, you write either it's true or it's false. And remember, we did that counter example vocabulary in 2.1. It's that one thing you can find that proves your statement false. So that's a yesterday's vocabulary word. So up above it says, I am to find the truth value of this statement. So I'm going to read it. If an angle is acute, then it measures 30. Is that true? If I tell you guys I have an acute angle and I'm holding it hostage behind my back, are you like, oh, she's got 30 degrees? You wouldn't say that. I could have any acute angle. Just because the angle's acute doesn't mean I get to conclude it's 30 degrees. So that would be false. This would be what we call a really, really bad if-then statement. A really, really bad conjecture. Because there are so many counterexamples. If an angle's acute, it could have been 5 degrees, it could have been 10 degrees, it could have been 21 degrees, it could have been 40 degrees, etc. But you only need one thing that proves it false. So, and the more counterexamples there are, the worse of a statement that becomes. So I'm just going to pick 40 degrees as my counterexample. So truth value means, is it true or false? Counterexample means, give me one thing that proves the statement false. So now the last part of our notes, we're going to work with what's called the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. And again, they're highlighted here on this table. This table would be a really good candidate for note card making. My statement, though, doesn't have the words if and then in it. So that's a little tricky because it says all squares have 4 sides. All squares have 4 sides. Circle that word all, and I would again like you to think of it as if. If I say all monkeys have tails, I'm saying if an animal's a monkey, then it has a tail. If I say all redheads are brilliant, I would write if you are a redhead, then you are brilliant. So the all actually becomes if, and so it's the first part of the statement. So I'd say if, now I need a subject to my sentence. I don't want to say if squares then, right? Because we try to have as good of English as possible. So let's say a square is a shape, or polygon. So I'm going to say if a shape is a square, because that's what came right after the word all. So you might even want to write all equals if, and again we follow the if. So we follow the if, we head right to being a square. If a shape is a square, then it has 4 sides. That would be called a true conditional statement. The hypothesis follows the if. The conclusion follows the then. If I were to use symbols, this would be called the P. This would be called the Q. And if I had to write that statement with symbols, I'd say P implies Q. If P, if a shape is a square, then Q, it has 4 sides. So now we're going to do 3 mix-ups of that statement. The first is called the converse. I like to think of it as the swapper. So go ahead and write swap. What you do for a converse is you just swap out the if and the then. So basically what you do is you say, I'm going to put you here and you here. So my converse just swaps them. The symbols for that are easy because I simply swap these out. I would say Q implies P. Writing it's kind of a pain in the butt, but it is what it is. I would say if, again a shape, but now I'm going to swap my if and the then. So I'm going to say if a shape has 4 sides, again feel free to pause if I'm writing too fast. Then it is a square. Just switch or swap. I like to call it the swapper. Then it is a square. Let me fix my E and get a period on there. Let's talk about the truth value of this statement. If a shape has 4 sides, then are you 100% sure it is a square? You should say no. It doesn't have to be a square on the root, so its truth value would be false. Again, if I ask for a counterexample, you could say a rectangle, a rhombus, a trapezoid, a kite, a diamond. There's so many things that have 4 sides that aren't squares. Okay? So it was true going forwards, right here. But it was false when I swapped them out, and that swap is called a converse. All right, so I call the inverse the notter. So I have the swapper, and I have the notter. What it does is it goes back, and you can go in green. You don't need to, do all these additions on your notes. Definitely have what I'm putting on this table. But in green, in blue I said it swaps. In green, what we do is what I call not. We don't swap anything, so I'm not going to run along these arrows. We just insert the word not on both sides. So I go back to the original and I say if a shape or polygon or whatever is not a square. Notice I kept it in the same order. I didn't swap it. I just knotted it. If a shape, or negated it. If a shape is not a square, then, and now I have to negate the other side. Then it doesn't have 4 sides. Or does not, so let's underline that word, that's why I call it the notter. Okay? If a shape is not a square, then it does not have 4 sides. So let's go grab our highlighters and let's highlight this word. Okay? So we didn't change the order, we just negated both. Now let's read that. And if I want to put symbols down, I did switch the order for the green statement. Let me go back to green. Sorry about that. I put my pen down and it defaults to it. All right. So I didn't swap them. So I still have P implying Q. I still have that original statement. But I put the word not in there. And the symbol for not is a little squiggle like that. So this would be saying negate P, negate Q. Don't change their order, just put the word not in there. Now let's decide its truth value. Again, go back and read it. Is what I wrote in green true? If a shape is not a square, then am I convinced that it does not have 4 sides? And I'm thinking, no. The shape's not a square, it could be anything else. It could be a rectangle, and a rectangle has 4 sides. Okay? So I have an original true statement, called my conditional statement, up here at the top. I have my converse where I swap the if with the then, was false. I have my inverse, which negates the if and the then, which was false. And then lastly, let's choose another color here. There. So let's go. I'm feeling a little purple action. All right. So in purple, I'll talk about the contrapositive. It does both. I call it the swap and not. All right. So the first one, the converse, swaps. The inverse knots. The second one swaps and knots. Let's go talk about the notation for that first. So again, let's go back up to our original statement. I need to swap them being the if and the then, with notation, the P and the Q. So I just swap them and reverse their order, and I need to negate both of them. So let's go back to the original statement. We're going to follow our blue arcs here with purple because I do need to swap. But then I also need to not. So watch what I did in purple. I'm going to do it again. I need to swap them. So my if and my then are going to swap places in my original. At the same time, I'm going to put the word not in there. So let's go do that. Here's my if. I'm going to swap it out with my shape having 4 sides. So if a shape, but I also have to negate it. So I'm not going to say has 4 sides. I'm going to say does not. That's what I mean by swap and not. Does not have 4 sides. Then now I'm going to go back to this first statement and say it is, but I'm going to negate it at the same time, is not. You see these 2 knots? And it was swapped. Then it is not a square. Let's read that for its truth value. if a shape does not have four sides. So again, I had a shape hiding behind my back, and all I tell you guys is the shape I'm holding does not have four sides. Can your brain make the conclusion that I'm not holding a square? Definitely, because all squares have four sides. So this guy is true. All right, so you can see there's a lot of words on my board. Practicing this on paper would really be laborious for you. Like you'd be like, oh, I'm writing so many words. So what we're going to do is instead of going to the notes and doing another one and writing it all out, we're going to head on out to Delta Math. In Delta Math, there's a formative titled 2.2 Mastery. And what it is multiple choice. It'll say which one of these is the inverse. And you'll click on the one where all we did was negate our if and our then. Once you get your 5 out of 5 on that, so I know that you've mastered this vocabulary, because you don't want to, it'll be way faster to just click on which one's the correct one versus writing it. So once you get that 5 out of 5, you're going to let me see it, and then you'll do worksheet 2.1. But if you were absent, I'm just going to have to trust that you got 5 out of 5 and look on my computer before you go tackle worksheet 2.1. All right, that's it for section 2.2. Sorry, why did I put 2.1? 2.2 is what we're on. Have a good one.